What's up, everybody? I'm Matt Gary, and in this episode of Coding with the Force, we're going to go over how and when to use the platform cache in Salesforce. All right, everybody. So today we're going to go over the platform cache, and we've got a lot to cover. The first thing that we're going to go over are the when and why to actually use the platform cache. And the second thing that we'll go over is how to actually use the platform cache. We'll go over how to set up platform cache partitions, how to use the session cache in Apex, how to use the org cache, and finally, how to use the CacheBuilder interface if you want to learn how to use that. So stick around and we'll get to all of that. But first, real quick, if you haven't or you don't already know to do this, make sure to go over to the community tab and vote on next week's video. You guys get to vote on every video that I do, so make sure to actually go vote so you get to see the videos that you want to see, and you're not sad when I make a video that you didn't love. And make sure to like and subscribe and all that kind of stuff so you get to know when I make yet another video, because I do every Wednesday. All right, so why would we want to use the platform cache? The biggest reason that we would want to use the platform cache is, all right, let me start off by saying, if you didn't know, SOQL queries are extremely expensive. In fact, SOQL queries take the most time when you are executing some code. So if you are building a lot of components, or you have a lot of components in, say, a community or within your Salesforce org for your internal users, and you're doing the same query a lot of the time between different components, chances are you could drastically increase your load speed if you actually used the platform cache. The platform cache, say for instance, you've got some custom metadata that you're constantly querying for in a bunch of different components. Or maybe you've got some like product information in a community that you're constantly querying to display in different formats to users. It might be in your best interest to cache that, and instead of querying for it, again, doing the slowest thing, querying, you could grab it from the platform cache, and you would load it, I don't know exactly how many times faster, but several times faster at the very least. So that is the absolute best way to do it, or best reason to use the platform cache in whatever capacity you use it. As far as when you would use the session cache as opposed to the org cache, you would use the session cache to cache things for individual users. So a session is for one user and only one user. So if you're wanting to cache things for just that user to make their experience more a bit quicker and to hold data that was relevant to them, you would use the session cache. Now, if you have some stuff that you're constantly loading that is the exact same thing for every single user in the entire org, and it basically never changes, then you might want to use the org cache. But you have to be very careful when you're using the org cache, primarily because it's shared by everyone. So you've got to know who's using it, what keys they're using, why they're using it and when, and just be careful. It's shared by the whole org, not just an individual at one moment in time. So that's the biggest reason. If you didn't know, basically what you can do is the session cache or the platform cache, it allows you to basically have data persist between different execution contexts. And what I mean by that is anytime you execute some code and it finishes executing, that is an execution context. Maybe you want that data to persist from execution context A to execution context B and be able to be quickly loaded into execution context B without running some SOQL. That's what the platform cache is for. It keeps that data held in memory so that you don't have to load it again. You don't have to query the database again for data that you need in a different execution context. So, major time saver if you're doing a lot of that, which chances are high, at least in some capacity. You probably are. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to do is go over how to actually create platform cache partitions. And if you didn't know, you absolutely must create these, or if you try to use the platform cache in any capacity in your Apex code, it's just going to tell you, sorry pal, you don't have any partitions. I don't know where to put your data. Leave me alone. Go create one and then come back. So this is the first thing you need to do if you haven't already done it. And the way to do that is to go to Setup up here, click this little wonderful Setup guy. And over here on the left side, once you're in Setup, type in cache or platform or whatever combination of those words so that you get this platform cache menu item, and then click on it and you'll be right here where we are right now. Now, I can't remember anymore. It's been a while since I have enabled this. I feel like the first time that you land on this page, it asks you whether you want to enable the platform cache, and you have to check a box and hit OK. If that's true, just check the box and say OK. There's not a lot to be worried about. Even if you enable it, if you don't ever use it, it's not going to hurt anything. So, anyway, so once you've enabled it and you're here, you'll get all of this information, and it's confusing and you don't know what to do with it. So let me just break down what each of these little charts means. So as far as the org's current cache usage, this is going to show you how close you are with your currently stored items in your platform cache to reaching, your limit. How much are you actually storing at one point in time? Is it too much? Is it barely anything at all? Only time will tell. And as far as this org's capacity breakdown, this is going to tell you how much storage you have to allocate to your different platform cache partitions that we'll create down here in just a minute. And right now it's telling me I have 3,072 kilobytes, so basically 3 megabytes. And you can only allocate this in 1 megabyte chunks. So you can see down here it says allocated capacity 2. That means I've allocated 2 megabytes of capacity to this partition. And over here on the partition allocation, if I had more than one partition, which right now I do not, but in a minute I will, it would show both of those partitions and how much of the basically storage you have for your platform cache partition that you're allocating to a particular partition. So that's what that means. Not that crazy, but a little confusing if you've never looked at it before. So the next thing we will do is actually create a new platform cache partition. Now, as you can see down here, I've already created my own in the past. I think I did this for the Nebula Logger tutorial. And I made it the default partition. So I'm just going to edit this real quick before we create a new one and explain what's going on. So I have come in here, and I could have named this anything because I'm not creative, I guess. I named it default partition because it is my default partition. And we'll see what default partition means in a little bit. Really, it doesn't mean a whole lot other than you don't have to use the namespace or the label when you're creating a key for your map of platform cache data. But again, we'll go over it in a little bit. I don't have a description, but you absolutely should put a description in here for every single platform cache partition that you create, because it is very important to know why it was created and what it should be used for. Otherwise, people are going to start using it for things you didn't want them to use it for. And then you're going to see the total capacity that's available, as in the total amount of megabytes that are free for you to use in your session cache allocation, in your org cache allocation. And what this means is you have, depending on your org, provider free, as in Salesforce provides this to you for free, session cache allocation, and you have organization, like megabytes for your allocation of storage for this particular platform cache partition. So I have, as you can see, 0 organization megabytes available because I'm in a developer org, but I do have a few provider free ones available, 2 of which I've already allocated here. So I have given 1 megabyte to the session cache, which we already talked about earlier. Session cache is for individual users. And I've given 1 megabyte to the org cache. Org cache is for the whole org. And I've saved it. So you can see that I've given 2 megabytes of storage to this particular platform cache partition. Now you could give a whole lot more. There is a maximum on how much you can give to these. So definitely look at the limits. I cannot remember them off the top of my head, but they're not super high. So it's not like, I don't think you can give like 100 megabytes to a cache allocation. There is a limit, a cutoff here. So just be aware. There are a lot of limitations to platform cache. Definitely look into all of them. I'm not going to list them all here, but I'll put them in the description so you can check it out later if you're interested. Okay, cool. So I'm going to go on ahead and create one more platform cache partition so that we can see how to use a default partition as opposed to a non-default partition. And we're going to name this platform cache partition Taco Cat, because Taco Cat spelled backwards is Taco Cat. Indeed. And give it a description. This is the Taco Cat partition where we store all taco cats. Perfect. And we can see that we still have 1 megabyte of capacity available to us. And I'm going to put that 1 megabyte of provider free capacity in my session cache allocation. So what this means is, because I gave this no org cache allocation, is I can only use this for storing session data. Now, it's not going to tell me that I can't use this to store org cache data. It's just gonna not do it. Like, I can still call this platform cache partition and try to store stuff in the org cache, and it's just not going to do it, and it's also not going to tell you that you can't do it. It's kind of frustrating. So be very aware of what you are storing and where and how much data you have allocated to that particular platform cache partition. Important, or you're going to get confused really quick. All right, so we've got our 2 platform cache partitions, and as you can see, like I talked about earlier, it updated this little pie chart thing. I think it's a pie chart. I don't know what it is. I'm not a chart guy. Obviously, I'm not in the reports and dashboards enough. But as you can see, it updated them. You can take a look. This one's got basically 1 megabyte, and this one's got 2 megabytes allocated to it. And that will do it. So the next thing that we're going to do is get into the code and actually see how to store this data in our session cache. All right, so let's open up in IDE and start developing some cool stuff. If you've never used an IDE before, I've got tutorials going over how to set up Illuminated Cloud 2 in IntelliJ, which is what I'm using right here, but also Visual Studio Code. For what we're about to do, you can't actually use the developer console, and honestly, hopefully these days you aren't using it anyway. But if you have no idea what an IDE is or how to set one up, I've got a playlist going over how to set up the 2 most popular IDEs, and I'll put it in the description, link it above, and you'll be able to check it out and set this up if you've never done so before. So what we're going to be building today is a very simple Lightning Web Component that's going to show us how to basically store things in the session cache and retrieve them from the session cache and the org cache in our Apex. And what it will allow us to do is show how much faster it is to retrieve things from the session cache or the org cache, or really just the platform cache, we'll just keep it simple, and as opposed to actually querying for it, right? So then we'll also go over the CacheBuilder interface, and that ought to do it. So let's get to it. The first thing that we're gonna do is create a Lightning Web Component. And that's why you need an IDE, because you can't use the developer console to create Lightning Web Components. And that's what we're doing here today. So let's create a Lightning Web Component, and we will call this the, who knows, session, actually, partition cache example. If you didn't know, you can't start Lightning Web Components with a capital letter. And I'm going to make this exposed. Now, you are probably not going to see all these options if you are in Visual Studio Code. That is fine. Don't worry about it too much. I will show you how to set up this exposed variable in the XML file. So don't worry, we'll get to it. We'll hit OK, and we've got our Lightning Web Component in front of us. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit so it's easier for you guys to see. If we go over here to the metadata file, if you go to the metadata file of your Lightning Web Component, you can see there's this isExposed equal to true up here. You'll just want to add this to your XML if you are in Visual Studio Code. That's what that little checkbox did in IntelliJ for us. The other thing that we're going to want to do is put in targets. So we want this to be available, I think, on the Lightning. We'll just put it on in, we'll make it a record page. I'm pretty sure that's what it is. Hopefully that's right. Otherwise, it'll give me an error when I try and save it, and I'll go back and fix this target if I couldn't remember it correctly. But basically what this allows you to do when you put a target in here is it says, okay, I allow this on record pages, right, on Lightning record pages. And that's really all there is to it. You can also put it on app pages and home pages and all that other kind of stuff. All right, so first things first, we're just going to create 2 buttons. And those 2 buttons are going to call 2 different methods to store data and to retrieve data. So we're going to say Lightning button, and we will give it a label of store cached, store data in platform cache. Just going to be real specific, and we'll put an on click that will eventually call a method that we have yet to create yet called store data. Keep it easy. All right, and then we're going to go down here, create another button, and give it a label of retrieve data from platform cache. And we'll do an on click where we retrieve data. All right, so we're going to now, I'm going to zoom in just so you can see it a little better. We're going to take these 2 method names that we have yet to create in our JavaScript controller for our Lightning Web Component and go over to our Lightning Web Component and actually create them. So we're just going to kind of stub out these methods, I guess. And we'll do a store data method and a retrieve data method. Now, obviously, at the moment, these would do nothing. I am not really doing much with them. And I need to create a controller to be able to do what I want to do. So let's do that. Let's create a controller. So the next thing that we'll do is go over here in the IDE and create an Apex class. And I will just call this partition cache example controller. Cool. And we will create two methods yet again. Store data and retrieve data in the controller. I'm going to not do that. I'm going to create two Aura enabled methods. If you didn't know, if you want a Apex class's methods to be accessible to a Lightning Web component or an Aura component, Lightning components in general, then you need to make them Aura enabled. And they also need to be public and static. And as far as what I'm returning, I'm not going to return anything. And we will call this store data controller. And basically what we're going to do is I'm just going to grab a random contact in my system, and I'm going to store that contact in my platform cache. I can say words sometimes. We'll see. But so let's get to it. I'm going to just grab one contact. I don't know that I would ever actually do this in practice. There are better ways to grab a contact, so don't necessarily repeat what I am doing here. But we'll just grab this contact. I know there's at least one in the system. And we'll get the first name and the last name and maybe the account ID or something. Why not? And we will then access our session cache. So I'm going to show you both ways to access a session cache, the default one and the non-default session platform cache partition that we set up. So basically, what we would need to do if we were using the default one is we would just say cache dot session dot put, and we would just say, you know, we would give this really any name. We would say like contact found is the key in our map, because if this cache session that we're building right now is just a map. So what we would do is we'd create this key. This key can be literally anything that you want it to be. I called it contact found. You could call it taco cat. And sorry. And then we will just place our contact in here, right? Now, if I was using a non-default partition, it wouldn't work quite so easy. What we would actually end up doing is saying cache dot session dot put, so same kind of thing, but we would have to put our namespace, which in my case is local, and in most of your cases will be local unless you have a namespace in your org that you have built. By default is local. Then you would say the name of your partition, which I believe was Taco Cat, but let me just double check that. It is indeed Taco Cat. Cool. And then I will put dot contact found and contact. So when you don't have that, when you're not using the default partition, you have to put your namespace and the platform cache partition that you're actually using. Otherwise, it's not going to work. It's not going to store it. And you'll be confused and lost and sad. So unless you're using your default session, platform cache partition, you need to place this in front of it. Now, that said, there is actually another thing called cache session partition that changes this a little bit. So I'm going to show you how to use it. And I'm going to zoom in here because I realize I'm neglecting to do that. And basically what you do is you just use the, you're basically going to declare a new variable of type cache session partition. And we'll just call this session partition is equal to cache dot session dot get partition, and we'll just grab the local dot tacocat partition. Cool. And then from that point on, you can just say like session partition dot put contact found. So as far as, you know, what would you prefer or not prefer, I guess it just depends. If you're going to be storing like a bunch of different variables in your platform cache partition, this thing here, then you might want to declare it and then just use this methodology of putting items into that platform cache partition. But if you're just going to put one thing in there, typically I just use this cache session dot put. So it really depends. If you're storing a bunch of different things, then I would go this route and declare my session partition and then and use this method to place things into that map. Otherwise, I would just go this route and make it a little easier on myself if I'm just storing one thing anyway. So yeah, that's pretty much it. If you wanted to store it in the org partition as opposed to the session partition, there's really not a lot that is going to change other than the fact that you're going to change this to org for all this stuff. And if you wanted this to be an org partition, you would just do org partition. And this would, of course, be org. So very little has changed, as you can see. If you want to use the org partition as, the org cache as opposed to the session cache, then you just switch everything to org instead of session. Not much has changed here, but again, realize if you're using org, you are storing that for everyone in the whole org. Whereas if you're using session, you're storing it for the individual running user at that moment in time. Be very, very, very careful with org. Please. It can be very useful, don't get me wrong, but it is important to know what it's actually doing. Okay, so now that we've gone over all those little things, as you can see, there's really not a lot to it. There's a whole bunch of methods, by the way, in the cache.session. We kind of saw that, but as you can see, you can get a handful of other things from this. So definitely look into the different things that you can, potentially pull out of the cache object or the session object. Do you need them all that often? No, but there are ways to access other useful pieces of information from time to time. Not that I use them all that often. I'm not gonna, I'll be honest with you. Very rarely use them unless I need to check my storage and make sure I'm not going over or something. There are methods to check your storage, which are useful. Okay, so what are we doing next? That's what we're doing next. We're going to retrieve data from our session, or our platform cache partition, or our session cache. I'm actually going to, I'm going to leave this guy in here for now. And we're going to create our second method called public static void. I don't remember what I called this here. Retrieve data, and wow, cool. And we're going to retrieve the data from our session cache and return it. So I'm going to actually not have void, but I will return a contact. And basically, I will just return a contact from my cache session get, and I will just get my contact found. All right, so basically what I've done here is from my default partition got my contact, and I know that this is a contact because I put it in there. You can also, to be safe, you know, this is a map, of course. This cache session here is a map. So if you wanted to check before you returned it, you could always say something along the lines of cache dot session dot contains contact found. So if you wanted to check, you could certainly check to see, does that key actually exist? Have we actually filled it out? Those are important things to do. So you can check that before you try to actually return something. I'm going to keep it simple. If I wanted to return the taco cat partitions version of contact found, I would just put this in here, my other key, and have it returned to me. And the last thing that I want to do, actually, just to be super thorough, I'm actually going to find a contact really quick so that we can know with absolute certainty, whoa, not what I wanted to do, how much faster this is than a query. So we'll just grab Mr. JigPig here, and I'll query by ID. And we'll just say from contact where ID equals this. And yeah, actually, cool. And we'll see, right, we are effectively just going to create another method that we'll call this retrieve data cache controller. And we'll call this one public static contact retrieve data SOQL controller. And we'll benchmark these against each other so you can see just how much time you end up saving. By the way, this is really pretty awful code, in my mind anyway. There's a lot that needs to be done here, so please, you know, don't just copy and paste this and put it somewhere. Anyway, let's go back now that we have all of these methods in here and grab, or actually call out to these in our Lightning Web Component. So we're just going to do a simple import statement. Import, what should we call this? Retrieve data controller from Apex, and what did I call this? Partition retrieve data cache controller. And I'm actually gonna come back over here, call this data cache controller. This variable can be anything, by the way. You can name this whatever you want, doesn't matter. And I'm just going to copy this import line a couple times to save us some time. And I'll say retrieve data SOQL controller. And we will say store data controller. Store data controller. Cool. So we're just going to keep this nice and simple. And we're going to go on ahead and store data controller. Then, and it's not going to return us anything, so we'll do an empty arrow function. And we'll just say, yeah, I don't know. We'll just put something simple in here for now and say we stored the data. Cool. And then we are going to retrieve the data from the cache, and we'll change this method name, which means we will have to go back and change the template here in just a bit. But that's no big deal. I'd rather have a method name that was correct. So we're going to do retrieve data cache controller, and we'll do .then, and this is actually returning something, so we'll do data, and we'll just say console.log. This is the data. And last one, we'll do retrieve data SOQL. Retrieve data SOQL controller. By the way, if you don't really know what's going on when I'm creating this Lightning Web Component, number one, it's not super important that you do, but if you are very interested in what I am building right now, I've got quite a few videos already on Lightning Web Components that go over this stuff way more in detail than I'm doing right now. I'm really just flying through this so that we can get to the point of the video, which is definitely not this. Okay, so we've got this button. I'm going to create one last button here that is just retrieve data from SOQL query, and have it actually call the right method. Boom. And we actually don't need to do this button up here. I'm just going to have this get called using the lifecycle hook called connected callback. And again, if you don't know what this is, that is A-OK. But basically what this is on the load of the component into the screen, it's going to call this store data function just automatically, right? I don't have to do anything. Just as soon as it loads, it's going to call that. Okay, and I'm going to save this, and maybe by some miracle I haven't made an error, but I did, so cool. And it gave me a weird one. An unexpected error occurred. Maybe I screwed something up. We'll just try and save this real quick. See what I broke here. Variable does not exist on 11. Oh, that's the Nebula Logger component. Weird. Okay, so the Nebula Logger component broke, but this one's fine. Whatever. And I'm going to come back here and save this one too. Cool. It actually worked as anticipated, I think. And we are going to go on ahead and open up Salesforce and place this in Salesforce, and then we're going to actually see how much faster the partition is as opposed to a SOQL query. So we will just, actually I can probably put it in this record page. We will edit this page. Again, I have other videos that go over this quite a bit more as far as, you know, putting Lightning Web Components in Lightning App Builder pages. But yeah, basically we're going to take this Lightning App Builder, or sorry, this Lightning Web Component, place it in the Lightning App Builder page. Obviously, this is really ugly, but I'm just kind of dropping components in here to show you how things work. I'm not making a pretty work, not at all. And I'm going to open up the developer console because it does actually have some pretty cool benchmarking tools to show you how fast things run or don't. Okay, so this has loaded up now, and I'm going to retrieve data from a SOQL query first, and we'll see how long it takes for a SOQL query. So I clicked that button, and this log popped up, and we're going to open this log, and I'm going to show you how to kind of see how long things take. We're going to view log panels, and we're going to do the execution overview and the execution stack. I do stack tree, and that'll do it too. Okay, so if we click on the timeline, you can see that 91.04% of the transaction was taken up by database transactions here. It took 12.7 milliseconds. Not a big deal, obviously, for what we're doing right now, but you can see that was a huge, huge amount of time. Now let's take a look at how much time it takes in comparison to just retrieve it from the platform cache. If we open up the platform cache and do the same thing with the debug, we view log panels, we look at the execution stack, and where'd it go? Execution overview, and we go to the timeline. We can see now it's just Apex code, but look at this. It only took 5.69 milliseconds to retrieve this data. Like nothing in comparison, right? It took half the time. Actually, it took less than half the time to pull from the session partition, or rather the platform cache partition. And that's a lot if you think about it. I mean, we're talking about you're cutting, in this case, which is a very, very, very remedial case, half the time out of your transaction. You can imagine if you're doing this in a lot of different places, you could cut out way more than that. I mean, you could double the speed at which you're running things. So you can see how powerful this is if you actually use it as intended. Anyway, it can speed up your platform quite a bit in areas where you're requerying for things over and over and over again when you don't really need to. And I guess we can just check to see if we actually got a contact. Of course, I think I needed to. Yeah, we did get it. I should have JSON stringified it, but we got the data both times. So, cool. Yeah. So, there is one more thing that I wanted to go over now that we've seen how much speed that we get out of it. I just wanted to briefly go over what the CacheBuilder interface is. There's not like a whole lot to it, but it can be useful because you can kind of control things a little bit more. But if we go in and we actually use this CacheBuilder interface, let me just quickly show you what it is. We can create a new class, and we'll just call this, I don't know, contact data class, or contact platform cache data, whatever. And we will implement the CacheBuilder interface. And basically what this is going to force you to do is create a method called the doLoad method. And you're going to do a public object doLoad. And the only thing that it's going to allow you to pass into it is a string. So we'll just say string contact ID or something. And basically all you can really do with this method is return the result of a SOQL query. So at least that's all I've used it for in the past. Now, maybe I'm underselling this. And somebody out there has used this for a quite a bit more than myself. I can't say I've used it all that much, but let's just look at how you get this done. We'll just basically do the exact same thing as we have here. And we'll return the contact. Because as you can see, all we're allowed to return is an object. Now, you could create a wrapper object potentially that stores a whole bunch of data if you wanted to, I guess, and return that wrapper object. I have a video going over wrapper objects if you don't know what they are. Super useful things. But basically, you can only return a single object. And the way that you access this is if I was over here in my partition controller, my partition cache example controller, and I wanted to retrieve from that contact platform cache data class, effectively what I would do is I would say cache session.get and oh, I kind of did this wrong. This should be looking to my contact ID variable, right? And I would say .get, and basically what I end up doing is I call the contact platform cache data class, or pass it the class rather, and then I pass it the ID, which, I mean, this is a horrible example. You would not want to like hard code an ID, by the way, ever, anywhere in Salesforce. And what that'll do is effectively the same thing. So I wouldn't have to call this method anymore. I would just be able to grab that from my class. And so we can see that. I will go on ahead and come over here, remove the call to store data, and then just output our contact. And as long as everything compiles, which it did, we will reload this over here, and I will just do the retrieve data from session cache again, and we'll see that it does the same thing. So we'll pull up the inspector, and I'm going to retrieve from platform cache. Hopefully. Did I click it? Oh, no, I didn't. And you can see that it returned our contact still. So even though we changed it, you are effectively still getting the same thing, and it's storing this in the session cache, or you could do the exact same thing for the org cache by just doing this. So pretty cool. I can't say that I've used it all that much. The one upside to using the CacheBuilder interface and you know, actually leveraging it here is that you don't have to check for nulls anymore. It catches misses, cache misses is what they call it, for you. So if effectively if there's not something loaded properly, it will figure that out for you, as opposed to you having to do kind of what we did before, which was like the if cache dot session dot contains a key, right? We don't need to check for it anymore because it just automatically handles that situation for us. Yeah, I think that ought to do it for this. If you want any more information about any of these things, I'm going to put some documentation in the comments. There'll be some technical documentation going over the CacheBuilder interface, the platform cache, session cache, all that kind of stuff. So definitely check it out. And if you like this video, make sure to subscribe and click the bell so you know when I make new things. And last but not least, make sure to vote on next week's video. Otherwise, somebody else is going to vote, and you'll be sad that you didn't get to watch what you wanted to watch. So go check it out, vote, and I'll see you guys next week.